Tansei, welcome to Soul Medicine, Ancient Psychologies for Wellness. I am your host, Dr. Karlee Fellner, psychologist and member of the Métis Nation of Alberta. As always, feel free to pick up what fits for you and to leave what doesn't. I'm just here to present a different way of understanding mental health and wellness. This podcast is not intended to provide or take the place of professional advice. If you or someone you know is in need of mental health supports, please reach out to one of the many resources available in your area or to a trusted professional. What if I told you that there's actually nothing wrong with you, that you are not a fundamentally flawed human being, that you don't have a disorder, a disability, a dysfunction, any of the disses? That's really what reconnecting with ancient psychologies is about. Kansai Métis Sigason, Karlee Fellner Munya Wihuin, Alberta Otinia. Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Karlee Fellner and I am a member of the Métis Nation of Alberta and a registered psychologist in the province of Alberta. My family was relocated through the half-breed script process up here in Canada from a place called Beaver Lake, that's near Lac La Biche in northern Alberta, to a place just outside of Camrose, Alberta, called Round Hill. I was born in Camrose at the age of a year old. My family moved to Devon, and that's where I grew up, just southwest of Edmonton, for those of you who know Alberta geography. On my mom's side, I'm Nehio Cree Métis, as well as Swedish, Norwegian, and Polish. And on my dad's side, I'm German, Austrian, Czech, and Hungarian. I am your host for Soul Medicine, Ancient Psychologies for Wellness, and I am super excited to have you here for the first episode. I have spent the past 15 or so years coming to understand best practices in mental health from Indigenous perspectives. And along the way, I've come to learn that those best practices for Indigenous peoples are often helpful to other people as well, especially those who haven't had a lot of success with the mainstream psychological system or psychiatric system. The origins of the word psychology actually means study of the soul, and psychiatry comes from healing of the soul. So we're talking about studying the soul and healing the soul, and yet when we look into our contemporary mental health system, it's very rare to see the soul attended to, or even the whole person. When we actually look at what does the study of the soul mean, psychology, what does healing the soul mean, psychiatry, it takes us out of those ideas of how we're a problem, how we have all these problems, how there's all these things wrong with us. That is something that has been created within mainstream contemporary psychology. And there's very good reasons for that, which I'm not going to get into on this episode, but I will next time. Early on in my work, when I started doing my dissertation research, one of the first things I learned is that mental health is a concept that we need to shifting out of this paradigm of mental health, which is really talking about disorder, disability, dysfunction, dis-ease, and shifting into understanding holistic wellness, understanding what it means to live in balance, in harmony with our relations, to live according to principles and teachings of natural law that help us to live together in a good way as humans, but to also live in a good way with all of our relatives of the natural world and the cosmos. So it's coming out of this paradigm of disorder, disability, dysfunction, dis-ease to understand that whatever it is that's coming through us is just a conversation guiding us towards wellness, and how powerful that is to understand that. For me, the whole purpose and intention in soul medicine is to give voice to understandings and ideas around mental health that are much more difficult to find out there. It's really easy to find information within dominant contemporary conventional psychology. Really easy to find information on major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, ADHD, PTSD, you name it. It is not so easy to find information on how mental health can be understood from different perspectives. I am just here to share some of what I've learned, and if some of it fits for you, I welcome you to pick that up, take it with you. And if it doesn't fit, just to leave that. It's really important for us to find ways that resonate and fit for us. I also want to share that as I talk about ancient psychologies, what I'm really getting into are the things that I've learned about Inuak Indigenous psychologies. As mentioned, I've been doing this work for about 15 years in a formal capacity. It all started when I was really becoming aware of the fact that psychology was not serving Inuak Indigenous people in a good way. And as I continued in my work, I've learned that it's not serving a lot of people in a good way. I personally have found it very healing, really powerful to learn about Inuak Indigenous psychologies. Indigenous peoples are so vastly diverse. There are huge differences between Indigenous nations and even within nations, between clans, between families. You cannot generalize about Inuak Indigenous peoples overall. And I want to be really clear about that because Indigenous has an implication of coming from the land, being of the land. So languages, cultures, traditions, all of that is very intimately connected to the lands where certain peoples originate. So in this podcast, I just want to be clear that it's not about overgeneralizing to Inuak Indigenous peoples overall. What I share when I talk about these ancient psychologies, these thousands of years old wisdoms on understanding human nature, understanding suffering, understanding healing, wellness, all of that, these are common threads that you'll see among different Inuak Indigenous peoples, often globally. So there's a lot that's culturally specific, and I typically won't go into things that are culturally specific. If I ever do, I will share where I learned it from, but that's going to be pretty rare because overall this podcast is about sharing some of the common threads of a land-based psychology. So psychologies that are rooted in relationships with land and place, because all of land is interconnected. And so there are natural laws that span the globe. One of the foundational understandings of ancient psychologies is that we know how interconnected we are. We as human beings are the land. It's actually a biological fact. Our bodies, everything about us is comprised of the water that we take into our bodies, the plants we take in, the animal material if we eat meat, whatever the nutrients are that we're taking in from the natural world, and even all the processed and junk foods that we eat, those have their roots in natural materials. And so we are the land. We're literally made of it, every single one of us on this planet. We can't survive without the land. One thing that we know about land is that it's constantly healing itself. I remember in grade school learning about homeostasis and all these different processes of nature where it maintains itself. The ways that the water is cleansed through the soil and through wetlands and through various systems. The way the air is cleansed through plants taking in CO2 and putting out oxygen. Constantly renewing, constantly healing. We, human beings, who are another reflection of the land, we are also constantly healing and rejuvenating and renewing. So whether we're looking at land, whether we're looking at our bodies, or honestly any other living thing on this planet, is just what is the rate of destruction or harm that's being put on that body, being put on the land, versus what is that rate of healing and rejuvenation. So that's all we're looking at when we start to talk about being out of balance or experiencing dis-ease or illness of any kind. Knowing that we are the land is us, we're actually constantly healing and renewing ourselves, whether we're aware of it or not. And we are interconnected with all of our relations. As a human being, I cannot exist in isolation of all the relationships I'm connected to. It's actually not possible because I rely on the very land and water that I'm bringing into my body. I am also connected to my family, community, to broader society, to all of humanity, to the animals, the plants, the air, all of the physical world. And then when we're coming through Inuak Indigenous understandings, it also includes the whole of the cosmos, the whole metaphysical world, and all of our relations, physically and metaphysically. So anytime we're experiencing any sort of difficulty, suffering, something that feels to us like a problem, it can actually be coming up from anywhere within that web. One of the first fundamental shifts when we're talking about ancient psychologies and understandings of mental health is that any quote unquote symptom that we're experiencing that's making us uncomfortable, or or that's giving us difficulty, and those things that make us feel good and give us joy and make us laugh, those are all conversations that are coming up through our bodies. Our body is actually communicating information with us. It might be letting us know, hey, this is good medicine for you because you feel happy here, you're laughing here. Or we might be getting the information, this doesn't feel right. I want to talk to you about this through the story of Iskotew and the crow. The story came to me when I was writing a book chapter, and I was wrestling with how to communicate what trauma, wisdom, and survivance meant within the context of people who have experienced trauma. Iskotew is a young woman that's, for as long as she can remember, this crow has always been bothering her. So long that it feels like it almost goes back since before her lifetime. Like it's been there forever. This crow is just caw, 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 claw, 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 peck, 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 all times of day and night. It's just disturbing every aspect of her life. It's there when she's in school trying to focus. It's there when she's trying to sleep at night. It's there when she's trying to have dinner with her family. And this crow just will not leave her alone. It's relentless. Iskotew, her family, friends, people around her, teachers at school, everybody's tried to get rid of this crow, everything they could think of. They have tried telling the crow off, yelling at it, trying to hit it with a broomstick to get it away. They have tried bribing the crow. Hey, crow, here's some treats. Leave us alone. They've tried ignoring the crow. Just pretend it doesn't exist. It'll go away. They've tried everything to get rid of the crow. Iskotew's even gone into Dr. Crow Whisperer. Dr. Crow Whisperer, don't get me wrong, had some good little tips and tricks and tools to help with the crow to kind of tone it down a notch, we'll say. But the crow was still there all the time. Eventually, Iskotew decides to go to Dr. Coyote. It's kind of her last resort, but what else is she going to do? Because this crow is relentless. It won't leave her alone. And it's disrupting her life more and more and more. So she goes and sees Dr. Coyote. Lets Dr. Coyote know what's going on. And Dr. Coyote looks at her and gives a big grin and says, Iskotew, I have just the thing for you, and hands Iskotew a little bottle of pills. These will help you with that crow. So Iskotew takes the bottle of pills. She looks, there's the fine print on there with all the little side effects, and she's not a huge fan, but again, she'll try anything to get rid of this crow. It's totally messing with her life. So she starts to take Dr. Coyote's pills, and sure enough, it seems that the crow is gone, or maybe more accurately, quieted. She's not really hearing the crow anymore. She's not really feeling the pecks and the scratches, hearing the caws, although the crow seems to still be around, but not in a way that it's noticeable at all, which is all Iskotew cares about. She also notices that other aspects of her experience are subdued. It's like colors aren't as bright anymore. There's other sounds that aren't as loud or clear as they were. Things just generally sort of feel a bit muted in Iskotew's world. But she doesn't care. As long as the crow's not bothering her, that is priority number one. And so she is good. She will continue to take Dr. Coyote's medicine. And so she carries forward and, she's going on about her business. Time is passing. And over time, she starts to notice that crow again. Very, very quietly at first. Caw, caw. She'll notice just the slightest little scratch, slightest little peck, and then it gets a little bit louder. Caw, caw. And it's not nearly as loud as it ever was. However, Iskotew is not okay with this because she hates that crow. So Iskotew is done with it. Iskotew is done with these pills. They're clearly not working enough to keep that crow completely away. And so she tosses them by the wayside. And sure enough, there's crow full force as though he never left. Caw, 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 peck, 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 scratch, scratch, scratch. One night, Iskotew's sleeping, and sure enough, 3, 4-ish in the morning, there's that caw, caw, caw. And that crow wakes up Iskotew again. This time she wakes up and she is done with it. She is so done. She is over it. She's had enough. She gets up out of bed. She goes outside and she just starts to walk. and walk and walk and walk. And she walks and walks and walks and keeps walking and walking and walking until the concrete disappears beneath her feet. And she's walking and walking and walking and walking and walking and just keeps walking and walking. She walks so long that she's walking through sun cycles, the sun rising and setting, the moon rising and setting, and she's just walking and walking and walking as though she could just keep walking forever. And she walks for so long until she finally reaches a clearing where she decides to stop and take a break. Iskotew lays down in that clearing. It's a beautiful fall day. The sun is out. There's just the slightest breeze, but it's a nice warm breeze. The leaves are still in the trees. And she can hear the wind blowing through the leaves, through the grass. She can hear the birds singing. She can hear the insects buzzing. And as she's noticing all of this, she starts to notice that she's not noticing the crow. For the very first time ever in her life, she's noticing everything else. Smells, sights, sounds, sensations, everything in full experience. But she's not noticing the crow. This has never happened. So she's lying there, a little bit stunned, to be honest. And then all of a sudden, caw, caw, it's that crow again. Iskotew sits up and she looks down in front of her. You! And the crow looks at Iskotew and it says, Danse! How are you, Iskotew? She looks at the crow. What? The crow just spoke to her in a language that she understands and asked her how she's doing. This thing that has been torturing her for as long as she can remember, possibly before she was born, is actually talking to her in a language she can understand. What? She says. She looks at that crow and she just starts laughing because I don't know, what else do you do when something that's been bothering you your entire life and since before you were born is suddenly talking to you in a language you understand and smiling at you. And so she just starts to laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh. And it's like so much laughter. Her whole body is shaking. The land is laughing with her. The ground beneath her is shaking with her. The birds, the trees, the wind, it's like all of the land around her is just laughing with her. And as she's laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing, laughing so hard her stomach is hurting, she feels all of those years of angst and hatred and frustration and just wanting this crow gone, melting from her body and into the land, just shaking out all of that stress. And so she feels that melt into the land around her. And she continues to laugh, laughing so hard. She's got some tears in her eyes. And she starts to collect herself eventually. Finally, she starts to take some of those deep breaths and gather herself. And she looks at the crow again and says, "What? You can talk?" And the crow looks at her and says, "Yeah, I can talk. I've been trying to talk to you for years, and your grandparents before that, and people even before that, but nobody's listening to me." Iskotew takes a moment. What? Shakes her head. She can't comprehend this. What is going on? Crow hops up to her, hops up on her knee as she's sitting there and says, "Yeah, I've been trying to talk to you for a long time. All of us are." Crow gestures to animals all around. Crow says, "Somewhere between the slot machines and the concrete and the social media, you two-leggeds have lost your way. You're disconnected. You're forgetting your original instructions." Iskotew leans back and looks at Crow. "What? Original instructions? What does that even mean?" Crow looks at her. "You're forgetting how to live in a good way with all your relatives. Put out your hand." Iskotew puts out her hand. Crow places in Iskotew's hand 7 little pieces of tobacco. And Crow says, "These teachings are part of your original instructions. I want you to take these back to your fellow two-leggeds, and I want you to share these original instructions, these teachings, with the other two-leggeds." Iskotew looks in her hand. "I don't know what teachings you're talking about. I still don't know what you mean by original instructions. I don't know what this is. I can't do this. I don't." But Crow looks at her and says, "You will know. And if you're ever in doubt or you need help, you just call on one of us and we will be there for you." Iskotew looks at those 7 pieces of tobacco and says, I don't know. But she looks in the crow's eyes, and that crow is very confident. There is not even one shred, not even 0.000000001% of doubt in that crow's eyes or in that crow's heart or energy. Iskotew sees how confident the crow is, sees how sure the crow is, and says, well, okay, I mean, I guess if you say so. She takes a tissue out of her pocket, wraps up the tobacco, puts it in her pocket. She doesn't really know what the crow's talking about still, but what else has she got to lose? I mean, look at how she was living before. She was done. She was done with it. It was over. So she accepts and says, okay, I'll do my best. I can't make any promises, but I'll do my best. Crow looks at Iskotew, nods his head and says, good. Flies away. Iskotew takes a moment. She sits back, kind of taking in what just happened, taking it all in, and she decides to take some time there where she is in the land, in that clearing. She lies down, allows herself just to be there among the sounds of the land, to be there in that peacefulness. She's not hearing the crow at all anymore. He's gone. He's done his job. And she just allows herself to rest there for a while. Again, for some sun cycles and moon cycles, she's resting and resting, just allowing herself to feel at ease, to feel at peace, to allow the land to rebalance her again, bring her back into harmony, back into her wellness. So she lies there until she feels that she's ready to get up and go back. So she starts to walk and walk and walk, and she's walking on the land and keeps walking and walking until that land turns into pavement again. And now when she's back among the people, among the two-leggeds, she's seeing things very differently. She's looking around and she sees an old lady who's kicking a coyote off of her heels. She sees a man that's trying to fight off a crow that's coming at him. She sees another person that's trying to get a raven away and yelling at it. And all of a sudden, she is filled with love for her fellow people. She sees what people are going through, the struggles that people are going through, and she's full of compassion, full of love for her human relatives. And she takes that tobacco out and takes out that first piece, that first teaching, Segidowin, love. And she goes and finds one of those trees that's planted in the dirt and puts that little first piece of tobacco at the base of that tree and prays for the people, prays for her relatives. And so that's where the story ends. For now. It's also where the story just begins. That story is a way to talk about whatever the quote unquote symptoms are that we are experiencing. That whatever it is that we're experiencing, whether it's, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between, the stuff that's both, anything that we experience is a conversation coming through our bodies. When we're talking about mental health, what gets called symptoms within mainstream psychology are conversations that are coming up that are trying to communicate with us. And those conversations are trying to guide us toward balance, wholeness, wellness, harmony with all of our relations, not just as individuals. So that information, that medicine that comes forward to help us is not only to help us individually, but it's to help our families, our communities, our societies, all of humankind. It's to help the land, the water, the air, the animals, all of our relations of the natural world, as well as of the metaphysical world. Similarly, anything that we're experiencing, let's say it's anxiety. That anxiety may not be ours. It actually might come from somewhere else within that web of relationships. And through time, we can consider each person at the center of our own relational universe. So there's us in the center, and then out from there is our families, our communities, our nations, our societies, humankind, and then the land, the water, the air, the animals, all of our relations of the physical realm, as well as our relatives of the metaphysical realm. So different energies, entities, spirits, whatever you believe in, the source of life itself. And then also through the generations. We are also interconnected generations before us and then generations to come. And so from anywhere within that web of relationships, through the generations and through our current relationships, we can be experiencing that quote unquote symptom. For those of you who are listening, wherever you come from, I encourage you to think about where your ancestors come from to the best of your knowledge. I know there's many reasons. Some people don't know where their families come from, whether that's through processes of adoption, other forms of disconnection. And so there's no issue if that's information that you don't have. But for those of you who do know where your ancestors come from, I encourage you just to take a moment to reflect on that. When we're coming from Inuit, Indigenous understandings, we know that we carry the stories of our ancestors in our bodies. Euro-Western science looking at epigenetics has found that our experiences change DNA, and we actually inherit that learning from our ancestors, from our parents, our grandparents, and so forth. I remember when those findings of those studies were coming out, hearing a lot of there's trauma in your DNA, there's trauma in your DNA, there's trauma in your DNA. Well, hold up, okay? Mainstream psychology is all about focusing on pathology, focusing on what's wrong, saying, hey, there's something wrong with you, you have a problem. Again, there's reasons for that, which I'm going to talk about in the next episode, because there's a whole system that's built around why that is. Whereas when we shift into counter narratives and we look at the whole picture of like, wait a second, it's not just trauma that's inherited in DNA. It's also all of the survivance that's there. Survivance is a term that was coined by Gerald Visner. He's a scholar from White Earth, Minnesota. He's an Anishinaabe. He talks about survivance as this active sense of presence. He talks about Indigenous survivance stories as these counter narratives to the stories we hear of tragedy, dominance, and victimry. Indigenous peoples have been here for thousands and thousands of years, and we carry all of that knowledge and that wisdom of surviving with the land and thriving with the land for generations upon generations. And we carry all the wisdom also of surviving attempted genocide through colonialism. So that's a lot of survivance knowledges. That's a lot of strength. That's a lot of wisdom. And all of that is just as much in our DNA. And the same goes for anybody else. That's why I always encourage folks, to the best of your knowledge, get to know who your ancestors were. And even if we don't know who our ancestors are, where they came from, what they've been through, that we do know that those stories are in our blood, regardless of whether or not we know them up here. Our body knows them. Our body knows the stories of what our ancestors have experienced and gone through. And those stories are going to come forward in moments where they're needed. So I'm just going to use the COVID pandemic as an example. In that moment, if I am experiencing all this anxiety coming up around this pandemic, it can be coming from anywhere in those webs of relationships. Perhaps I had ancestors, let's say 5 generations back, who actually survived an outbreak of some kind of communicable disease that took a lot of lives. I might be experiencing some of that ancestral anxiety in this moment because those ancestors are coming through to say, hey, we survived through this and we want you to be careful so you can survive through this too. And maybe some of that guidance that they're bringing is going to help me navigate that and survive that and be okay. So these knowledges are coming through us, through the collective, through the generations, to guide us to wellness, to guide us to live in a good way for ourselves and for all our relations. When we went through the pandemic together as a human species, people were experiencing a lot of collectiveness. We might have been experiencing a fear, anxiety, exhaustion, fatigue. We might not have experienced any of those things either, and that's fine. But for those who did, a lot of that was shared. It wasn't just yours. It was shared with many, many others across the world. That's how collective and connected we are. Or something could be coming from a previous generation into this time to say, hey, I have a message for you here today. So just like the crow, whatever it is we're experiencing is trying to bring us a message, help of some kind and guidance towards wellness. Now, the beautiful thing when we are coming through these ancient psychologies is that we understand we have the medicine to heal ourselves in relation. So every person, every family, every community has the medicine it needs to heal itself. Because we are always connected, we always have access to any of the help within that web of relationships. When you're coming from a mainstream psychology approach, there's this idea that the psychologist or the psychiatrist is the expert. They are the one that has the thing that you need to help yourself. That is not the case when we are coming through Inuak Indigenous approaches or through these ancient psychologies and psychiatries. We understand that the medicine that's needed, the healing that's needed, is coming through you. And yes, that might involve getting help and supports from other people, from the land, from just other relations within those web of relationships. But ultimately, you are the one that has those answers. You are the one that knows. You're the one that can listen to the crow. There's other crows that are working on other people, including the psychologists and psychiatrists themselves, because we're all human beings. One of my all-time favorite books, which I actually have right here, is Eduardo Duran's book, Healing the Soul Wound. And in that book, he has a very simple quote at the beginning of one of the chapters that says, "The medicine is within the pain." That just talks about how whatever that difficulty is that's coming forward, that pain, that suffering, that challenge, those quote unquote symptoms, that they actually have information in them and medicine in them when we learn to take a step back, to hear it out, listen in, and to engage that wisdom that's going to guide us toward wellness and living in a good way with all of our relations. So we could be experiencing what's labeled as depression, anxiety, whatever it may be. That is actually trying to bring us information and wisdom for what we need to bring balance to our lives and wellness to our lives. So it's just about being able to sit back and listen in. So for me as a psychologist, when I'm doing therapy with folks, I'm just there to facilitate, support that person in being able to hear whatever the medicine is that's coming through them. And when I say medicine, what I'm talking about is anything that's there to help us. It's anything that's coming forward to bring us to greater wellness, balance, healing, whatever it is that we're needing at that time that's going to help us in a good way. And there's all different kinds of medicines. So think about some of those examples for yourself. It could be spending time with someone who just brings a lot of joy to your life, or who listens and hears you out and validates you and helps you feel seen. Or maybe some of your medicine is like really good food. So let's use a physical example. Heartburn. I think about heartburn. What is that? Fire, acid, right? That burning. It might be like you're burning the candle at both ends, so to speak. Maybe I'm working too much, or I'm moving too fast, or I'm burning myself out, and my body is trying to communicate to me, hey, you need to take a step back. You're burning yourself out. And you're also eating too much deep fried food. There's some messages in there that are guiding me toward wellness, that are letting me know, hey, Karlee, there's medicine in this. You need to pay attention so that you don't get ill or go further to where you're doing more damage to your body. So we are constantly healing ourselves. Our bodies are constantly healing themselves, our minds, our hearts, our spirits. So mental health, or what's coming up for us, is actually just all a part of that same process. I think if there is one way that I want to leave our first episode together, it would be just to let you know that there's nothing wrong with you. You just have conversations coming through your body to try to help you, to try to guide you in a good way. Hi. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you on the next full moon.